Hi, I'm Greg Kokel with Stand to Reason, and this is our second session together, Learning the Tactical Approach. Let's take a few moments just to review what we covered last session. I think that'll be good for us. First of all, we talked about restoring a missing piece, the bridge, so to speak, from the content to the conversation. You have a lot of knowledge, you may have a lot of information. How do you get that into play? Okay. Secondly, we talked about the tactical approach kind of in general, the skill of maneuvering in conversations and how important it is to have that skill to be a good ambassador for Christ. Remember, we talked about an ambassador having knowledge, wisdom, and character, and the tactics are the tactical wisdom of maneuvering. That's what we're talking about right here. The third thing I did is I encourage you to reframe your own thinking about this whole enterprise. Instead of thinking about going for the gold and getting the person to sign on the dotted line, winning them to Christ in that particular engagement, I encourage you to think of yourself not as a harvester, but as a gardener. Okay? Since season of gardening is always necessary before there can be a harvest, probably most of us are gardeners, not really harvesters, and that's where we can do the best good. I know I'm a gardener, not a harvester, okay? Now, with that in mind, I also suggested modifying the goal of your conversations so you wouldn't be worrying about trying to close the deal. Rather, your goal is to do something else. You just want to try to put a stone in their shoe. That's what I said. You want to just get them thinking. You want to annoy them in a good way. You want to do a little bit of gardening because there's a whole team of other gardeners that can help along the way in this person's life. You're just looking to do a little bit. So in a certain sense, we're lowering our expectations of what we want to accomplish. And hopefully, in doing so, it will encourage us to get out more and be more active in engaging people for Christ, okay? Now, we talked also about the game plan that I promised that I'd give you that would allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you think you know, or how aggressive or knowledgeable or even obnoxious the other person may be. It's a game plan that's very easy to put into place, and the core of that game plan is the Columbo tactic, that is using questions to move gracefully in any conversation. Questions keep you relaxed. They keep you protected because you're not making a particular point. You are trying to figure out what their ideas are. They're gracious. They're drawing the other person out. I mean, lots of advantages to asking questions. Now, I mentioned also that in our game plan, the first step of our game plan was simply to gather information. So when you're encountering somebody, you're going to talk to them about spiritual things. That's your goal. Don't worry about getting to the end yet. Just think about gathering some information. Before you gather information, you don't know where you're going to go. Once you gather information, there still may not be an opening, and that's okay. Now, the first step of that game plan is to simply gather information. And you do that by using some form of the question, what do you mean by that? Now, it's a model question. It can be asked in lots of different ways. Use whatever way is appropriate for the circumstances. And I gave you some examples last time about that. Now, in this session, I want to introduce you to the second step in our game plan. Okay? So we got step 1, step 2, and step 3. 3 parts to the game plan, all part of the Columbo tactic. So here's what I have for this particular session. I want to give you the second use of the Columbo tactic, the second step in our game plan. Remember, there's 3 steps to the game plan, entail 3 different types of questions. This will be that second step. And I want to teach you how to avoid a common trap in conversations that I call the professor's ploy. I'll also tell you what to do when you don't know what to do. Ever been there before? Finally, I'll show you how to use the Columbo tactic to keep you out of the hot seat. So this session is going to be really productive to teach you a lot of different things and show you the flexibility of the game plan that we've been talking about. Okay, here's the second application of the Columbo tactic. The first is to gather information. We use some form of the question, what do you mean by that? The second use of Columbo is to reverse the burden of proof. Okay? Reverse the burden of proof. You might have heard the phrase before, but let me explain what I mean by burden of proof. Whoever makes the claim bears the burden. Let me say that again. Whoever makes the claim bears the burden. That is, if you are saying something is so, especially if it's controversial, then it really is up to you to give some reasons why people should believe you, why they should think it's actually so. If you're asking questions, of course, you bear no burden of proof. That's kind of the point of the tactical game plan that we're using right now. You're asking questions, you're in a safe situation. The problem is Christians will get into the habit of trying to refute every story or every tale somebody can spin. They're telling a bedtime story. They come up with some kind of story, and now they think it's our job to refute the story they've told, when in fact it's their job to give reasons for it. In the immortal words of Desi Arnaz, they got a lot of splaining to do. And so we want to get them to do the splaining, if you will. We want them to give the rationale behind their point of view. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I was on a radio show in Los Angeles many years ago, the CBS affiliate there in town called KFI, and this is the shock jock radio station, and they wanted to bring the weird Christian in to talk about God and to talk about creation over and against evolution. So I was glad to do that. After we talked for a little while, they had the callers call in, and I started fielding calls. One of the callers started to raise the issue of the Big Bang against me. Now, I know there's a lot of controversy in Christian circles about the Big Bang. I understand that. But I think part of the problem is Christians don't realize how well the Big Bang fits into their own story. The point is they believe the Big Bang. Let's just work with that. So he's throwing the Big Bang in there, and I told him, I think the Big Bang works for me, not against me, because Big Bang needs a Big Banger. I mean, to put it simply. Now, he said, no, that's not necessary. You don't need a big banger to get a big bang. You can get something from nothing. And so then he went on to explain it. And here's what he had to say about that. He said, no, I don't think it is. That is, I don't think it isn't a good argument from the Big Bang for God. You don't need God. Because, he said, you could start with a base of nothing. And you could say that there was nothing but an infinite continuous moment. Until one tiny little insignificant thing happened, a point happened in the nothingness. Now that's the problem, isn't it? How do you get a point in the nothingness? Anyway, maybe because it was a really small point in his mind, it was easy to do. Anyway, he continued, that requires no intelligence, so no intelligent God had to intervene. All we need is a tiny imperfection in the perfect nothingness that expanded, became increasingly complex, and soon you had the galaxies and planets spinning out of this. Now, apparently his point of view was you start with nothing, and nothing is like a placid pond. And then from somewhere, he didn't say, you get a speck of nothing that falls into the pond and annoys it. And it starts bucking and weaving and starts spitting out galaxies and planets and the like. That's his view. Now, I'm thinking, I got to answer this guy's question, and I don't know how you'd have felt in that situation, but I knew how to respond because I pointed out the way the guy started. He said, you could say that, and then he spun his story. I said to him, you're right. You can say anything you want, but giving us good reasons to believe what you say, that's a different issue entirely, and that's your job. It's not my job. In other words, it's not my job to refute his story. It is his job to give reasons in support of the story. I don't have to play it all until he's given me good reasons to take his story seriously. Okay? Think about it this way. You know what a gauntlet is, right? It's a medieval glove that knights would wear. What did it mean when you threw down the gauntlet? It meant it was a challenge. The knight doesn't throw down the gauntlet and then step back and say, I win. No, the other knights are going to say, hey, you're just in the game. You just anteed up. You just started. You got to put up now or shut up. You got to show us what you got. And the same thing is true in this situation. When people make assertions, don't mistake it for an argument. It's not. An argument is a point of view, an assertion with supporting reasons. If they're just making an assertion, you have nothing to deal with, really. You want them to go further. You want them to give the reasons for their view. You want them to bear the burden of proof. And here's the phrase I want you to watch out for. The phrase is, I can explain that. I can explain that. So you're talking about something spiritual and some evidence for Christianity that you think points to God, and they say, well, I can explain that. Be prepared to get a bedtime story when you hear that. They just spin a yarn. And there's lots of different ones that they offer that they think are compelling. And they think in their own minds, if they can just come up with an alternate explanation, then they've done a good job in refuting your point of view. But keep this in mind. An alternate explanation is not a refutation, okay? These tales that people tell have great rhetorical power. They're very effective psychologically to dislodge your confidence in what you believe. But these things have to go another step. They have to be put to the test. Not everything that's possible is reasonable. And this second step of our Columbo game plan shows that the other side has to do better than just have a good imagination. They have to have reasons. And so here's the key question that you use to reverse the burden of proof. Now, how did you come to that conclusion? Or what are your reasons for that? Or why do you think that's the way it actually took place? I mean, there are lots of ways of saying it, but essentially you are moving the burden of proof back on the person who has made the claim, and that's exactly where it should be, okay? Remember, the person who makes the claim, what? Bears the burden. Let me give you some examples of this. It's not uncommon to run into people who say, well, Jesus was just a mere man who was exalted to the status of the Son of God, say at the Council of Nicaea in 325 or something like that. I mean, this is Dan Brown's argument in the well-known Da Vinci Code, okay? Okay, the first thing that I'm going to do is ask my first Columbo question. What do you mean by that? That is, I'm going to ask him to tell me more. How exactly did that take place? How do you think that worked itself out? And let him talk, okay? Once he's done talking, it's not over yet. It's not enough for him just to give me his point of view. I've got another question. And the question is, why is it that you think that's the way it actually happened? How do you know that really took place that way? Now, we have the details of the Council of Nicaea. We know what happened there, and of course, that isn't what happened there. But I want to put that on him. How about people who say, I was born a homosexual? Well, I'm going to ask him, how does he know that? What do you mean by that is basically the variation there. And he'll say, well, ever since I was a little child, I remember having these kinds of feelings, and I've never had any different kinds of feelings, so I must have been born that way. Now, I know as a matter of fact that there's not a single shred of scientific evidence to support that notion. There is no such thing as constitutional homosexuality, and I'll tell you, every single person in the industry, whether they're pro-homosexual or gay or not, all know the same thing. Homosexuality is not innate. You'll never hear it on CNN, but this is the fact of the matter. But let's just set that aside for a moment, okay? When people say that they are born homosexual, I want to ask them, what are their reasons why they are born homosexual? How do they know that? And I'm looking for some factual evidence for that, not just an anecdote from them. How did you come to that conclusion, okay? I've had people say to me, well, the unborn may be a human being, but it's not a person. Now, this is a move in the pro-abortion case. Maybe a human being, but not really a person, okay? So what's the question I ask? What's the difference? What's the difference? They're making a distinction between human beings that are persons and human beings that are not persons, and they're saying that some who are persons get the complete protection of the law and others that are not persons you can kill with impunity. They better be sure they know what the difference is. So I want them to tell me. I'm not taking it upon myself to have responsibility for trying to prove that all human beings are persons. They're the ones who made the claim that some humans are not persons, and it's their job to tell me why they think that's so, okay? Now remember, the first question that we use in our game plan, what do you mean by that? That helps you to know what the person thinks. Absolutely important to know how to proceed, okay? This second question, how did you come to that conclusion or some variation? This helps you to know how the person thinks. What are the reasons for his point of view, okay? Does he believe things for good reasons? Some people have no reasons. You ask them that question and you're going to get silence again because it charitably presumes that you have, or rather they have come to a conclusion, all right? And a lot of people haven't come to conclusions about what they believe. They're just socialized to believe what they believe. And so you're going to get the sounds of silence again. Don't panic at that point. Just wait them out and see what they have to say. It might be a little bit uncomfortable. How'd you come to that conclusion? What are your reasons for that? They don't know what to say. That's all right. Just let them work with that a little bit. So they may be caught flat-footed when you ask for reasons, but at least your question gives him a chance to express his rationale if he actually has one. So remember, the two most important tactical questions that you can ever ask a person are, what do you believe? And why do you believe it? Those are our questions, essentially. Now, I want you to think for a moment. Just reflect on the tone of our questions that we've covered so far, the first steps of our game plan. These are engaging questions, conversational. They're probing. You're gathering information, but they're still amicable. And they keep you in the driver's seat while the other person is doing the heavy lifting, okay? Now, what I'd like to do with these two things in place is I want to explain to you about a trick that could be played on you that has to do with the burden of proof, okay? I call it the professor's ploy. Let's say you're in university, and it's pretty common nowadays to be in a university classroom and have the professor bent on destroying the convictions of every Christian that's in his class. Sometimes they announce that at the beginning of the session. You're a Christian here, you won't be a Christian when I get done with you, okay? And then they take opportunity, even when it's not relevant or germane to the topic, to attack Christianity at every point. They might say things like, the Bible's just a bunch of fables, okay? Now, oftentimes you're going to have a Christian who's in a class like that, and they're not going to take this lying down. They're going to raise their hand, they're going to stand up, they're going to go after the professor, okay? Now, I think this is right-hearted, but I think it's wrong-headed because it violates a fundamental rule of engagement, which is this: never make a frontal assault on a superior force in an entrenched position, okay? This is just suicidal. The man with the microphone's going to win. And a professor in this situation always has the strategic advantage, and he knows it. So don't get into a power struggle when you're outgunned in a situation like that. Now, I'm not saying you should break off the conversation. I'm saying use your tactics instead. So if you're a student in a class and the professor says, oh, the Bible's just a bunch of fables, I don't know what question might come to mind right about now that you might ask the professor. Right, what do you mean by that? And let him talk. Let him explain, give more detail about it. Fine. By the way, is that question a challenge? Is that question a head-to-head with the professor? No, this is what you're supposed to do. You're a student. You're asking questions, okay? Fine, so he explains it. Once he's explained what he means by that, I don't know, what other question might come to mind right now you could raise your hand and ask? How did you come to that conclusion? Right. Now, it might be, though, that the professor figures out what's going on. He realizes, there's the Christian there who's sandbagging, laying low, and he's going to call you out. And he might say something like, well, you must be one of those Christians who thinks the Bible's the Word of God, every jot and tittle. Well, look, I got a little extra time here. Why don't you stand up right now and explain to the rest of the class why you think the Bible's not a bunch of fables, but it's the inspired Word of God? Go ahead. Okay, now what has the professor just done? He's reversed the burden of proof on you now if you're the student in that class. And why is that an illicit move under these circumstances? Because you have not made any claims. If you haven't made any claims and you're only asking questions, you don't bear any burden. The ploy here, the professor's ploy, is for him to make the claim and then to say essentially, you prove my claim wrong. Well, let me give you a piece of advice. Do not take the bait. Do not take responsibility to disprove another person's view before they have already given some evidence for it. They're making you do the hard work. Don't let them do that. Now, in that circumstance, you might say, well, Professor, you don't know what I believe. I might even agree with you, but I've never even said my point of view, so you don't know. I'm just trying to find out two things. I'm trying to find out what you believe and why you believe it. Unless you just want us all to take this on faith. No, you don't say that. I'm joking about that part. The point here is you don't need to be the expert in everything, even with the professor. You don't need to know everything. All you need to know is two simple questions, and that is, what do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion? And if you keep the burden of proof on the other side when they're the ones making the claim, you don't have to have all the answers. In fact, I think you can be really effective when you know very little if you ask the right questions. And here's a little secret that I'm going to let you in on. I have seen this happen over and over again for myself and also with others who talk to me, that people have come in kind of so full of themselves and their sails are just filled with their own sense of confidence, and they're shouting and pouting off all of these things against your view. And then you ask them, what do you mean by that? Or you ask them, how did you come to that conclusion? And I promise you, you can, many times, not always, but you can just see the wind go out of their sails. They haven't given any thought to this kind of thing. They haven't worked this out for themselves, and so they get caught flat-footed. I've seen it happen time and time again, how the Holy Spirit can use just these first two questions. So now, what do you do if you get caught in a conversation, you've asked the first two Columbo questions, and you're still not sure where to go next? What do you do when you don't know what to do? And in my opinion, I don't think you have to do anything. There's no magic, in a sense, about this. If you follow the game plan, then it'll lead you inexorably to this wonderful conclusion where the person prays and receives Christ. We don't know what's going to happen. Remember, we're just gardeners. We're not harvesters, okay? In these first two questions, you don't need to know anything. Okay? You just need to know the questions, but you don't need to know any content. And it might be when you get to the end of these questions, you're done. The third use of Columbo, you need to know something, and we'll teach you in our next session how to use that. But maybe you've just gotten this far and you don't know what to do. Well, there's nothing wrong with letting a conversation just die a natural death. If you don't have the resources to go further, don't be compelled to force the conversation. Just consider it a fruitful, interactive learning experience. Even so, I've had folks go out after this much training, and they've just gone out onto the university campuses for conversations, and it's amazing what you're going to learn just by asking these questions. You're going to be amazed at how easy it actually turns out to be, and that's the feedback that we've gotten. So you don't have to hit home runs. You don't even have to get on base, in my view. All you have to do is get up to bat, get in the batter's box, and the first two Columbo questions will accomplish that. Now, I want to show you one more thing that is an advantage of these Columbo questions. I call it getting out of the hot seat. Sometimes you're afraid of going further in a conversation because you think, oh, maybe this other person knows more about this stuff than I do, and they're going to hit me with a bunch of stuff I don't know how to answer, okay? And so you end up not saying anything at all. You don't want to get in over your heads, okay? You want to get pushed around by some aggressive critic that's blasting you with your arguments or opinions or information that you don't know how to handle. Okay, and I can sympathize with that. You don't want to get in that circumstance, because once you get in that circumstance, who's in the driver's seat now? Not you. They are. You want to be in the driver's seat. Okay, and this next little adaptation of our first two Columbo questions are going to buy you some time if you find yourself in that situation. Okay. And part of what I want you to see here is I don't want you to feel under pressure to immediately answer every question or every point that's made, especially when the other person is coming on really strong, okay? If you find yourself in a circumstance where you start out in persuasion mode and you're trying to get them to see your point of view, and then they come back with information or arguments or points of view that you have no understanding of, you've not been exposed to it all, you find yourself at total loss for words, really overwhelmed by the information. They may not be overwhelming you with their personality, that's a different set of circumstances, but you just can't deal with this information. When you're in a situation like that, let me ask you first of all, who now is in the driver's seat? Not you, right? The other person's in the driver's seat, okay? I'm going to give you a move that will help you get out of this hot seat that you find yourself in, okay? And I want you to practice a little bit of what I want to call conversational Aikido. Aikido is that self-defense practice that you don't oppose the force of someone else. You don't push back. You just use their force in your favor, okay? So what we're going to do, in a sense, is let them keep coming at you, but we'll want to do it in a way that you will actually be in control of the conversation. So if you find yourself in the hot seat, being overwhelmed with information you don't know, you want to shift immediately from persuasion mode to fact-finding mode. You want to immediately become a student. And you can say something like this. You say, wow, it sounds like you know a lot more about this than I do. I wonder if you could help me out here and just do me a favor. Slow down a little bit. Because I really want to understand your particular point of view, and tell me more clearly, precisely what it is that you believe, and then tell me your reasons for it. Okay, and I'll get a piece of paper out, and maybe I'll take some notes because I want to get this right. Now, what you've done then is you've completely reversed the circumstances. Do you have any obligation to answer their challenge when they give it to you? No, you've already said, I'm the dummy. You're the smart person. I don't know what's going on. Give me an education. All right? And then they talk to you. They let you know what they believe and why they believe it. You might be taking some notes or at least making a mental note of it. And then you say to them, let me think about it. Let me think about it. Now, them's the magic words, and I'll tell you why. Because if you say, then let me think about it, do you have any obligation to answer the challenge? No, none at all. You're going to think about it, okay? So then what do? Well, you do what you said you're going to do. You think about it on your own, at your leisure, when the pressure is off. That's the best time to resolve these things. And you can go to websites, you can go to books, you can go to any other resources that you've used in the past to get information regarding that thing. Now that you got the point of view and the reasons for it, and you can work it out on your own. And then you'll be ready for the next time. The next time that person or some other person with the same thing comes up, you'll be ready to respond to that particular issue. And if you can respond to it by using questions to make your point, all the better. The key here is to get out of the hot seat, but still stay engaged and get yourself back in the driver's seat. Essentially, what you're saying to the person is, you want to beat me up? Okay. Just do it slowly and thoroughly, please. Now, is there anybody that you know yourself, even the most retiring, shy, bashful, skittish, timid, reserved, who cannot do this, who cannot say, you want to beat me up? Okay, just do it slowly and thoroughly, please. No, anybody can do this. This is easy. This is easy. Now, you haven't won that person to Christ, but that's okay. That's not our goal. Our goal isn't to get them to sign on the dotted line. Our goal is to do a little gardening. And sometimes we find ourselves at a disadvantage, and then we have to maneuver tactically to stay in the driver's seat and make the best of the circumstance that we are disadvantaged in. And this is the way to do it. Those two questions, just the way I've described it. Remember, you don't have to swing for the fences. You don't even have to get on base. You just need to get in the batter's box, and these two questions will get you there. Get in the batter's box, use these questions, then watch and see what the Holy Spirit does. So that's the foundation. That's your game plan. Two questions. What do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion? And with that, even though we've got lots more to talk about, I've already fulfilled my promise to you. Remember the first session? I said I was making a promise that I would give you a game plan that would allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you knew or how knowledgeable or aggressive or even obnoxious the other person happened to be. I've done that. If you remember these questions, you can talk to anybody. And if you forget everything from our session together, remember this. take a tip from Lieutenant Columbo, always ask questions, right? So let's do a quick review of what we covered here in this session. First thing I did is I introduced you to the second use of the Columbo tactic, the second step of our game plan. I call it reversing the burden of proof. And remember the rule there, the one who makes the claim, right, bears the burden. No more free rides. We're not going to let people just say whatever they want and not have to account for it. And I taught you how to avoid a burden of proof trap that I called the professor's ploy. Never allow someone else to put you in the position of having to make the case when they are the ones who have made the claim, okay? It's his job to defend his own view with reasons or evidence. I talked about what to do when you don't know what to do. If you've gotten this far and you can't go any further, fine, let it die a natural death. Don't sweat it. Do what you can and let the rest go. There's no need to force the conversation, at least not in my view. And finally, I showed you how to use the Columbo tactic defensively to keep you out of the hot seat. And what I said was go immediately into student mode, take notes if you need to, and then invite the other person to tell you what he believes and why he believes it, and then tell him you'll think about it. And then think about it, okay? On your own time when the pressure is off. Now, in our next session, we will complete our game plan with the third use of Columbo. It's very, very powerful. And in the meantime, I want you to do some homework. This next week, I just want you to make some conversations with people. Make conversation using the question, what do you mean by that? Make conversations using the question, how'd you come to that conclusion? Again, we're just getting into the batter's box. We're not shooting any further than that. And then when you do that, you'll see what the Lord will do just with those two questions. See you next time.